Well, Cameron, we just had a half-hour car ride where we couldn't talk about myself because we were saving it all for this. So he knows I'm from California. It's all gone to hell. I'm Todd Medema. I am a junior at Carnegie Mellon University. I came in as a business major, but I decided to create my own major of technology, entrepreneurship, and design, which is kind of everything, but that lets me take the classes I want to, so that's what I did. It took a lot of finagling and, paperwork, but at least at Carnegie Mellon you can kind of do anything that you really want to. People kind of realize that you want to do something and they'll help you make it happen. Well, I had to come up with some elaborate reasoning why, as an entrepreneur, I need to understand the technology that I'm building as well as how to design great products so that I can interface with those teams, You just have to come up with an excuse. Well, if we're going for hobbies, how much time do you have? My current fascination is with filming. I got a Steadicam and a GoPro, and I'm shooting stuff with our parkour club and all sorts of other random filming. I still am into photography, but the interest in photography kind of evolved into that. I did martial arts for like 11 years before coming to college. Played the clarinet for like 11 years. I've tried learning like 12 different instruments, and played them for like 3 months, but I program video games, I build websites. I'm pretty sure I have ADHD, but that's, how things roll. Well, I guess it's kind of in the context, because usually people meet me in the context of like technology and entrepreneurship, but all the way up to college I did Boy Scouts, and so I've actually been backpacking across the New Mexican desert and lots of crazy things like that, so I guess most people wouldn't guess that I know how to start a fire and survive in the wilderness. Right, so I listen to basically every type of music, except rap and country. I grew up in a country town, so I reject my roots, and there's not enough musicality to rap, so... But I grew up playing in a marching band. I tend to favor music that's very musical, and I actually have a lot of songs that... I don't really listen to lyrics when I listen to music, so I have a lot of, Christian songs and, hardcore, the world is ending songs, and, I don't really know what they're saying, but it sounds good. So, off the top of my head, kind of my favorite type of music is soundtracks, especially for movies. A lot of them are kind of poor, but then if you listen to, Lord of the Rings or The Incredibles, it's really interesting, how the music worked in the movie, and then when you listen to that music later, you just, recall everything that's going on in that movie. You listen to Lord of the Rings and you think, this is easy, and then you listen to other movie soundtracks, and you really begin to respect, how hard it is to convey a tone not in a cheesy way. I played clarinet 3rd grade through 12th grade, and I tried doing it a little bit in college, but just time-wise, it struggled to happen. And then my first summer through college, I had a full-time internship, and apparently you have more free time working a full-time job than you do as a college student, and so I decided to learn the violin, and so I spent 3 months really getting into that, and then came back to college. But that was a fun little stint. Well, I do remember my mom saying when I was younger, I don't know, 8 years old, that she found it quite funny that I listened to more classical music than my dad does, which I guess comes from the background of playing instruments. After I played the clarinet for a lot of time, I slowly began to realize that there were people who were going to play music professionally, and I would never be at that level, so it was kind of silly to compete on how well I can play this instrument. And I started, playing lots of different instruments and just, trying things out, because it stopped being about, being the best at the instrument and more about just having fun. I guess, finding a difference is always something I've been good at. I'll have friends who are music majors, and they're like, what do I do after I graduate? And I'm like, start a YouTube channel, do something weird, the beatboxing flute guy was a tremendous YouTube phenomenon, because, nobody else was doing that, and so that's, one of the things I find is, I could do this, but if I wanted to actually do it, I would have to do it differently than other people. How am I going to do that? Yeah, so I certainly watch all of the big things like The Avengers and Lord of the Rings. Those are kind of social, and okay, I did see The Avengers 4 times in theaters, because that was a great movie. But as I've gotten more into actually filming myself and being behind the camera, I've started watching a lot of classics like 8½, and Citizen Kane and that sort of thing, to start studying it more as an art form. And it's a much different experience than watching like Iron Man 3. But from when I was much younger, one of my earliest, strongest memories about film was that my grandpa had the complete collection of James Bond. Not even like store-bought, he actually recorded them on VHS every time they were on the TV. And like that was what we did when we went over to his house. So I have a lot of like ingrained James Bond characteristics from that. Definitely Lord of the Rings. You know, that is one of like the few blockbuster hits that's also been of very good artistic merit. A lot of the classics that I've watched, like Citizen Kane and Vertigo, I've really liked as well. You know, they aren't necessarily something I'd like tell my friends to sit down and watch it with me, but you know, films that I can appreciate that the director was really trying to express something and not just sell his movie to the highest bidding theater, yeah. I haven't seen any Tom Cruise movies in a while, but I am rather excited for Oblivion. I guess that's because I have a sci-fi streak in me. Yeah. I've seen all 11 Star Trek movies and every episode of Star Trek TV, so I actually much prefer the kind of the middle of the Star Trek around The Next Generation, where the CGI stopped being bad enough that it caused you to vomit uncontrollably, but they still kind of had that feel of exploring and solving puzzles. You know, the new movies are a lot more on the CGI side and just, ooh, look at that spaceship fall from the sky. I'll still watch it though. Don't really pay attention to celebrities. They do their own thing in pop magazines, and I do productive things instead of reading about them. I've been to a couple like interviews, lectures, and that sort of thing where famous people talk about how they got to where they are. And honestly, it seems like most successful people don't really know how they got there. You know, they attribute it to luck and like, yeah, I was really interested in film and I just like went out and did it and started this company and now I'm here. And it's not really useful. Like, celebrities don't give that good of advice. I think advice giving for the most part is done entirely wrong. A lot of people are concerned about, you know, minor tips and like, what direction should I take? But really, your direction is what you choose and no one else can give you that direction. And probably the only helpful advice I've ever gotten is kind of strategies and like ways of thinking about things. Yeah, so probably the only meaningful money advice I've ever gotten was to stop being concerned about saving $2 on that latte and start thinking about how you can earn more money, you know, getting a raise or, you know, writing a book or something, and think about the big wins rather than the small wins. And, you know, as many tips as I've gotten about money over the years, like that one strategy is like more meaningful than any of them. And a lot of times advice tends to be more confusing than it is useful, especially like advice that contradicts itself, like, oh, you know, do this, but you don't want to do that too much, and how does that help me? You know, I feel like that's why a lot of people are actually confused about what they want to do in life, because there's all of this advice that doesn't really have any meat behind it. I mean, that's where ways of thinking start coming in, where, you know, instead of thinking about like, how do I save money, just think about that you should save money on things that you don't care about so that you can have more money to spend on things that you do care about. And like, that will generally hold true, but it's up to you to figure out how that works in your life. So if you walk away from this interview with one thing, it's how to manage your money. Yeah, so I'm in college, so I don't really read, except textbooks, but who reads the textbooks? When I'm out of school, it's actually interesting that, you know, not having classes, I actually read all sorts of meaningful learning material. I'm reading one on, like, economic modeling, and I'm actually enjoying, like, I read that over spring break, and I enjoyed that more than the economics class I'm currently taking. But then for fun, I read, you know, kind of a fair amount of sci-fi when I need to relax. Huge fan of Isaac Asimov. I previously read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and John Adams, The Wealth of Nations. John Adams? I think it's John Adams. But The Wealth of Nations. And it is kind of interesting because those are like the classics, like this founded economics and this founded military strategy. But in some ways, like because they're so old, they're so hard to understand, and sometimes like modern translations and newer treatises on the topics are much more interesting and useful. I remember back in elementary school, we had those quizzes where you'd read a book and you'd take a quiz and you'd get bonus points for taking the quiz. And I, being the little upstart that I am, was in like 6th grade and I was trying to read 12th grade level books. And of course I would fail all of the quizzes on them because, like, you know, much more advanced books. I think I might have even been in like 3rd grade. And my teachers really didn't know what to do because on one hand it looked like I was failing the classes, but on the other hand I was, you know, clearly trying something out of the ordinary. In the end, the school actually chastised me for that, for doing so poorly on my reading examinations. So, school is bad for you. Back in elementary school, I was a complete troublemaker. I got suspended multiple times and, you know, detention like every month. And then by high school, like, that had all gone. And I think a big reason for that was that I began to realize that, you know, in elementary school it was very forced, like, oh, I have to go to school today. And then by high school, and especially in college, when I created my own major, I became very determined to kind of make my education what I wanted it to be. And that's something that the system doesn't really allow for, because you can't have every single student doing their own thing. That's what made the difference for me of actually caring about learning. And I guess, like, in my life, the way it ended up working out is that my mom didn't, like, force me to become, like, a medic or a doctor or like a lawyer or anything. Like, the one thing she always told me was, you know, do whatever you want to do and, like, you'll be good at it. And so that's kind of what, you know, kind of got me to making my own educational path. Because, like, the thing is, anyone can do it, but unless you have that kind of push and that reminder that you can do it, then most people aren't going to know or be comfortable carving out their own chunk of education.